Number 5. The Conjuring. Now, if you're a fan of this channel, no doubt you know all about Ed and Lorraine Warren, the famed demonologists with a storied career in investigating the paranormal and unknown. You probably knew as well that The Conjuring was based on real events, but how much do you know about the real story that inspired the mega hit? Well, just like the film, in 1971, the Perron family moved into a 14-room farmhouse in Rhode Island with their 5 daughters. Almost as soon as they could start unpacking their things, however, they began to notice bizarre happenings around the home. It all started pretty small, just weird little things. Objects moving, a broom being found in a room different from where it was left. The girls would say that they'd see spirits floating around the halls, but you know how kids are. The mother, Carolyn, researched the house's history to see if there was anything that suggested it was a ground for spiritual activity. She discovered that the house had been home to one family for 8 generations. Not that scary. She also discovered that many members of this family all passed away under mysterious circumstances. Pretty scary. Now, just like the film, they learned at one point the house was owned by a woman named Bethesda, who was thought to be a Satanist and a witch. One of Perron's daughters thought that Bethesda's spirit threatened her mother's presence. And just like in the films, the Warrens found their way to the Perrons and performed a seance to try and speak to Bethesda, and claimed they saw Carolyn Perron speaking in tongues during the seance. Now, where the movie differs slightly is that in the film, Ed Warren performs an exorcism and heroically saves the family and cleanses the house. But in the real story, the Warrens were sent away because the Perrons were worried about Carolyn's mental health. They also did not perform an exorcism, as Lorraine Warren said it wouldn't have been appropriate for them as they weren't members of the ministry. The Perrons stayed in the house until 1980, when eventually the hauntings started to go silent. This might be one of the few times a horror movie based on a true story had a happier ending than the real story. Love horror movies? Me too. Stick around at Top 5 Scary for more stuff every day. Let's creep on creeping on. Number 4. The Amityville Horror. Another haunted house story, and wouldn't you know it, another one attached to Ed and Lorraine Warren. If there was a haunted house in the Midwestern United States in the 1970s and they made a movie about it, well, by gum, those 2 names will come up a lot. They were very busy. The Amityville Horror has been made into a movie a few times, first in 1979 and again in 2005, if you can remember that terrible period when Hollywood was dredging up every single horror franchise and rebooting them terribly. Both movies are based on a real-life famous haunting, however, and while details vary between the films pretty wildly, let's see how they stack up against the original case. In 1973, a man named Ronald DeFeo slayed his family in a brutal crime, claiming that he had heard voices that had commanded him to do it, and there was some entity in the house. 13 months later, the Lutz family bought the house. The realtors had warned them about the house's grisly past, but it didn't bother them. You know how the housing market is. A friend of the family told them that it would be wise to have the house blessed, since there could still be evil inside the walls. After the family moved in, they described all sorts of paranormal wrongdoings going on. Green viscous slime coming up the staircases, voices speaking out to them, telling them to get out, flies all over the house, and the family even seeing wild things like specters. Now that's all pretty bad, but the film adaptations really take it up to the extreme. In the films, the Lutz family faces spirits directly, seeing ghosts, the father even gets possessed and attacks the family dog. Now, nothing this extreme happened in the actual haunting case, but there was a photo that was released that appears to show a ghostly boy walking across a staircase. But there's a lot of discussion as to whether or not it's legitimate, or whether or not anything involving the haunting was legitimate at all, as there are many who feel that it was faked by the Warrens and hyped up a little bit to try and make it a much more interesting story so they could sell books or movies. Well, real or not, it definitely worked, as the book was a smash hit and there have been dozens of movies since, meaning we're not leaving Amityville anytime soon. Number 3. The Exorcism. Now, The Exorcism is an iconic horror movie and legendary story adapted from a novel. Not many people know that the novel and the film were based on a real-life exorcism of a boy named Roland Doe, or so we think, as his real name has never been cleared up. Living in Maryland, Roland lived a quiet, sheltered life, relying on his aunt for company, a noted occultist, and fascinated with the spirit world. She gifted him a Ouija board at a young age. After his aunt passed, it wasn't long before the family home started to experience a series of strange paranormal events. Like it always does, it started a bit small, just objects moving around the house or water leaking from all the pipes in the house, but then eventually it started to ramp up. It seemed like Roland had become possessed. He started to fall mysteriously ill, and red scratches appeared all over the boy's body. The family was put in contact with the clergy, who suggested they needed an exorcist to help them. Now, unfortunately, although in the film, Reagan only needed one exorcism, albeit a brutally rough one, Roland wouldn't be nearly that lucky. Roland was exorcised round the clock for weeks and weeks. Now, he never turned green and vomited up pea soup, nor did he ever twist his head all the way around, but they did report that he would growl gutturally in a voice that wasn't his. He would speak Latin, and even threatened the priests by saying that Satan had taken control of his soul. On one occasion, during an extreme exorcism, he broke free of his restraints when he was tied to a mattress and managed to slash at one of the priests using the buckle, similar to Reagan attacking her exorcisers multiple times in the film. After weeks of battling, eventually like a miracle, Roland woke and said he saw a vision of Saint Michael and Satan battling for his soul, and after that, he was freed. None of the priests were slain like in the film, and luckily after this harrowing experience, Roland was able to live a quiet, normal life and tried his best to live under the radar, not wanting any more attention than he'd already had. After reading about it in a newspaper, author William Blatty was fascinated by the case and inspired to write about an exorcism of his own, which would then become The Exorcism. And then the movie was made, and well, the rest is pretty much history. Number 2. Annabelle. Another famous story from the Warrens' legacy. We knew we'd be seeing them again. Based around probably the most famous and recognizable haunted item in the Warrens' Museum of the Occult, Annabelle. The real Annabelle is a cursed Raggedy Ann doll that was one of the first cases the Warrens ever investigated. Now, the real Annabelle already looks pretty unsettling and isn't the kind of thing I would ever give to a child, but her Hollywood glow-up made her even more terrifying. The story of the film and the legend of the real Annabelle differ pretty greatly though. In the film, Annabelle is given off as a gift from a husband to his pregnant wife, whereas in reality, the Raggedy Ann doll was given to a nursing student, Donna, by her mother as a small gift. The film does feature Donna and her roommate Angie speaking to the Warrens at the beginning, describing their experiences with the doll. That's kind of where the two stories stop being the same and start differing greatly. The original story, Donna claims that the doll would move around their home, appearing in random places, occasionally having red stains on her no one could explain. She would complain that her and her roommate would wake up covered in scratches, again, no one could explain. They said they would find notes scrawled in red writing across the home, reading cryptic things like "Help us" or "Help Lou," the name of Donna's roommate's fiance. The most extreme thing any of them ever reported was that Donna's fiance claims one night while staying over, he felt something crawling on his leg, and when he looked to see what it was, he saw Annabelle on his leg and claims the doll leapt up at him. He woke up the next morning completely unsure if what he had experienced was real or not. Now from there, they contacted a medium to arrange a seance to see if they were dealing with something truly evil. From here, the Warrens were put in contact to help them and take Annabelle off their friends. While the real story is no doubt spine-chilling, the movie got a lot more dramatic, involving satanic cults, deaths, house fires, and a whole lot more. But still, I probably wouldn't want to spend any time near the real Annabelle, just in case. Number 1. A Nightmare on Elm Street. Wes Craven was a master of horror. I don't think it is completely fair to call him a visionary and an icon of the craft, giving us not just one, but two legendary classic horror movie franchises, A Nightmare on Elm Street and the satirical horror movie series Scream. Freddy Krueger is larger than life as a horror icon. He's incredibly popular, appearing in several of his own movies, even coming into some of Jason's movies, starring in a couple video games as a playable character in Mortal Kombat and Dead by Daylight. A horribly burned dream-invading ghoul, manifesting people's worst fear and attacking them in a place no one can help them and no one can believe them. He's terrifying, but by gosh do we love him. It's no wonder Freddy's had such scary staying power. But I bet you didn't know Wes Craven was inspired by a real-life horror story for Freddy. Don't worry, there's no real-life groundskeepers that were cast into a furnace, at least I think. Wes Craven was reading the LA Times one morning and he read an article that pierced him and stuck with him. It was about a refugee family that fled to the United States for the fear of their lives. The son of the family was plagued by nightmares and said that he was too afraid to sleep. When he finally found himself falling asleep in the middle of the night, he was screaming and passed away during a nightmare. This spoke to Wes Craven deeply, who sympathized that he was too afraid to sleep and no one would listen to his worries, and saddened at the idea of something that would attack someone while they were vulnerable and away from the protection of supervisors and guardians. From that tragic story, Freddy Krueger was born as a manifestation of this horrible concept that affected Wes Craven so deeply, trying to conjure up the most evil thing he could think of. Since then, Freddy's become a pop culture icon and is not without his legions of fans, but few know the true story behind the iconic slasher. Number 5. Youre Next. Hey, family dinners are always a bit awkward, aren't they? You know, trying to get the gravy passed to you, trying to avoid an argument with your uncle about your career, and trying to elude the vicious sickos that are hunting you and your family for sport. Youre Next is a 2011 slasher directed by Adam Wingard, who also blessed us with Godzilla vs. Kong, one of the finest films ever made. Made on a humble $1 million budget, Youre Next is a horror movie that brings it to the absolute basics. One house, one troubled family, and 3 very dangerous psychopaths. An estranged family is meeting for a reunion at their summer home in the rural Deep South, and newcomer to the family, Erin, is nervous to be introduced officially as her boyfriend's long-term partner. Now, tensions are high enough with the usual family drama before the first crossbow bolt pierces the window, as the family is being hunted by a relentless pack of bloodthirsty animal mask wearing lunatics who seem to be doing this whole thing just for kicks. Watch the family fall apart under pressure, metaphorically and uncomfortably literally, as they're picked off one by one by their sick predators, until one of them starts to rise up unexpectedly against their tormentors. Now, if you were a fan of the Hotline Miami games, this is probably as close as you're ever going to get to a movie for that 80s splatter feel and all the animal mask wearing lunatics. Youre Next feels like a movie that got time traveled from 1984 in the best way. It's a throwback to the golden age of B-horror movies. Wet, gross, stupid, and in the darkest ways, really funny. This movie's almost a dysfunctional family comedy, if you can call it that. It's sinister, sick, gruesome, and hilarious, has an absolutely great sense of style, really cool soundtrack, and I guarantee you the main song from the movie is gonna get stuck in your head for weeks afterwards. Definitely check Youre Next out if you're looking for some fluffy horror fun. I've got a DVD at home if you want to borrow it. Now, hey ghouls and goblins, you already know that the best place for the scary video— Hey ghouls and goblins, you already know the best place for scary videos on the web is right here, but if somehow you didn't know that, always a good time to learn, so why don't you subscribe so you never miss a scare. Number 4. The Color Out of Space. When we think H.P. Lovecraft, we tend to think of giant squid monsters and incomprehensible madness. Well, this movie's got one of those in folds, and it's not the squid monster. The Color Out of Space is a 2019 horror movie directed by Richard Stanley, adapting the H.P. Lovecraft story of the exact same name, but modernizing it slightly, bringing it up to the 21st century. The story details a father moving his family to his late father's farm, escaping the bright lights and humdrum of city life, moving to his hometown of Arkham, the exceedingly cursed city from Lovecraft's writings. What should be a breath of fresh air and lovely times in the cottage turns to a nightmare when an asteroid falls to the farm, releasing with it a mysterious color that seeps into the farmland. A color out of space, if you will. It affects the minds of everyone around the farm, all the animals, and begins to seep into the water and drive everyone to incomprehensible madness. Nick Cage plays the patriarch of the Gardner family, and let me tell you, there could not possibly have been a better actor for the lead in a movie about slowly going mad. I mean, Nick Cage on his absolute best day already seems like he's about 2 screws short of absolute madness, so watching him in this is a treat. You spend the entire time wondering if the insanity is taking him over and consuming his brain, or if that's just how Nicolas Cage talks and he thinks he's doing a New England accent right now. Color Out of Space builds really slowly, leaving you on edge the entire time, and when the madness sets in, it sets in hard as you painfully watch the farmstead fall, desperate that maybe, just maybe, someone will pull through against the immeasurable horror of some entity beyond the cosmos. It captures Lovecraft's writing effortlessly and brings it to the modern age flawlessly, with all the blood and insanity you could hope for. Number 3. The Void. Our next entry on this list is The Void, a 2016 horror flick by Steven Kostanski, another Lovecraft horror movie. Your host has a little bit of a bias, and this one's Canadian made, so I have to include it based on that alone. It also totally rocks, so there is that. The Void is another flick that feels like it time traveled through the mid-80s, and maybe it's just my personal tastes, but that is very much a good thing. The Void seems like the kind of thing John Carpenter would have slapped his name on. A small-town deputy has his night wildly disturbed when he finds someone suffering from violent injuries, and after taking him to the local hospital, finds himself trapped in the hospital with his ex-wife, a nurse, who's dealing with a crisis of her own as the hospital is being overrun by an onslaught of mysterious injuries and madness. The 2 estranged lovers find themselves caught in a blood-soaked conflict between a sinister cult and some entity that appears able to revive the dead, albeit a bit twisted into horrifying monstrosities of flesh and bone. Now, if you're like me and you think The Thing is the greatest horror movie ever made, The Void feels like it could be its unofficial sequel. It's better than the actual sequel prequel to The Thing that they made. The special effects on the monsters are fantastic. If you're the kind of ghoul who loves puppets, prosthetics, and gallons worth of corn syrup blood, The Void has everything you are looking for in those 3 spades. And the plot is fun, and it has some good twists and turns, but let's be honest here. You're watching this one because it's got very gross monsters and really cool Lovecraft-inspired mythos of cults and a great god beyond the stars. You want my advice? Grab a friend or 2, order the largest, greasiest pizza your local favorite spot has, grab a 2-liter of something carbonated, and have a great Friday night with this one. The Void to me is what a good horror movie should be. Gross, scary, a little stupid, and a ton of fun. Number 2, Hush. Okay, enough movies about incomprehensible horrors from beyond the stars. Let's reel it in a bit and let's get back to some comprehensible horror. Home invasion. Lock those doors! Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn the volume up. Hush is a 2016 slasher home invasion movie coming to us from Blumhouse horror icon Mike Flanagan, director of a ton of amazing horror projects like Oculus, Dr. Sleep, Midnight Mass, The Haunting of shows, and Hush is no exception to that rule. A deaf and mute horror writer, that's why I did that before, who lives alone with her cat in the woods with a few isolated neighbors around her, becomes the unwilling target in the most dangerous game when a twisted hunter decides to make her his prey. After hunting her neighbor with a crossbow, he sets his sight on her next. When he learns that his next victim is deaf and mute, it seems like he finds himself thrilled at the possibility of a challenge. Now, Hush could have very easily just been your run-of-the-mill slasher home invasion movie, but it stands a lot taller than that with some incredibly fantastic sound design. I mean, I would hope so, given the premise of the movie and the name of the movie. The movie is so tense and saves its sounds really effectively for when it knows it's going to be the scariest. Makes it a lot scarier than the usual horror movies with a bombastic booming soundtrack and tons of scare hordes. It lets you really breathe in the tension. The cat and mouse game between the protagonist Maddie and the unnamed hunter feels deeply personal, putting you smack dab in the middle of it, chewing your fingernails the entire time as you hope for the best. Please check out Hush. Now, number 1, Green Room. Coming in at our number 1 spot is one of my favorite horror thrillers of all time, Green Room. An A24 horror classic before that was even a cool thing to describe your movie as. A failing Midwestern punk band are trying to hit it big while traveling the Northwest, barely scraping by on instant ramen and van life when they agree to play a gig at a rural roadhouse. Absolutely thrilled at the prospect of getting paid for once, the band takes the gig without asking any questions, only to swiftly discover upon arriving that they are in bad company. The bar is ran and owned by a skinhead gang who don't take kindly to them whatsoever. After the bassist witnesses a crime in the eponymous Green Room, the band is trapped by the gang who refuses to let them leave. Alive. From here, the movie turns into a sort of reverse home invasion as the band tries desperately to escape the clutches of the gang by any means necessary. Green Room is tense. You are going to feel like you are trapped in there with them. If you've ever survived a local DIY show basement, then the sights of Green Room will look pretty familiar to you. Setting a high-octane horror movie in such a hostile environment that you'll recognize makes it feel all the more real. You know, I've seen countless horror movies in haunted houses, but I can't name that many in a bar basement. Green Room is horror at some of its best, taking a concept I guarantee you haven't seen before and exploring it beyond just a simple bloody slasher. Fantastic camera work, dark humor, and a gripping plot with lovable characters and truly hateable villains. We are 3 paragraphs into me talking about this, and I haven't even dropped the biggest bomb, which is that the leader of the skinhead gang is played by Sir Patrick Stewart in one of his most unhinged roles ever since maybe American Dad. I'd say he steals this thing, but honestly everybody delivers. Anton Yelchin also delivers one of the best performances of his career as the band's weary, tortured bassist. Go into Green Room expecting a super tense, shockingly gory, but amazing horror movie if you can brave it. Just make sure you get a stamp on your wrist so you can leave.
Starting off this countdown, we have The Cube, flesh-slicing laser. Cube is a 1997 Canadian science fiction horror film directed and co-written by Vincenzo Natali. The film begins with 5 strangers trapped in a room with no memory of how they got there. The room is a cube with hatches in its walls. But if you open these hatches, it will just lead to another cube, identical to the one before. So it seems like they're trapped in an endless puzzle of cubes. But there's more to it than just that. The cubes also have different traps in them that can easily kill its victims. The characters then have to avoid being killed in a claustrophobic environment, which makes them extremely paranoid and confused. Now there's 2 traps that I want to talk about. First off, let's look at the acid trap, and it's just how it sounds. It's a trap that squirts out acid and burns one of the characters' face right off. Yum. Now the next trap is the flesh-slicing laser, and it's horrific as it sounds. Basically, in the movie, one of the characters named Alderson, who is a pretty mysterious character, wakes up in a room by himself. He's isolated from the rest of the group. In the end, he ends up setting off a booby trap in the cube that's a laser that literally slices him to pieces. It happens out of nowhere, so you're just like, what the hell is happening? Like literally we see his fingers get sliced off and then his whole hand, then his body just gets sliced right down the middle. It's pretty great. In at number 4 we have Escape Room. Much like most of the movies on this list, Escape Room is filled with elaborate traps designed to kill the characters in the film. Released in 2019, Escape Room is about 6 strangers that get brought together for a chance to win $10,000. All they have to do is complete the escape room. Sounds pretty easy, right? Wrong. It proves to be more deadly than they anticipated. From rooms that could scorch them alive, freeze them to death, or poison them, it's definitely not the game that they hoped for. Along the way, it's revealed that the characters' tragic and dark pasts are why they're actually brought together. So now let's start by looking at the first room in the game, which was a room that would roast the players alive. Basically, one of the players sets off this trap and slowly the room begins to heat up. They all then have to come together to figure out the room's riddles and escape it before it literally scorches them to death. Now thankfully they do escape this room, but not all the characters were as lucky in the following rooms, like the upside down billiards bar room. In this room there's a whole bar with a pool table, but it's upside down, like it's on the ceiling. And parts of the floor will periodically fall, and if you're on the floor at the time that this happens, well, you're plummeting down a shaft to your death. The only way they can leave this room is to find the missing 8 ball, which is the key to entering the other room. Sadly, while retrieving the key, one of the characters plummets to her death. In our third spot, we have the reverse bear trap. The Saw franchise is known for its elaborate and gory traps created by the one and only Jigsaw. This movie is filled with disturbing torture devices and traps, and the victims often die a horrific death, like the bucket room trap. The victims have metal buckets on their head with chains attached to that. The chains then pull them towards numerous saw blades. The only way to make the blades stop is if they make a blood sacrifice. But honestly, that one isn't so bad compared to the reverse bear trap, and it's as horrifying as it sounds. So basically, there's this contraption placed onto the victim's head. It's secured by a padlock and there's a timer attached to the back of it. The victim then has 60 seconds to find the key to remove the trap, or else it will activate and rip their jaws apart. Hence why it's named the reverse bear trap. Instead of closing, it's opening. So it's hooked onto their upper and lower jaw so that when it springs open, it's ripping your face off. The first victim of this trap was Amanda Young. John Kramer brought her into this game because of her drug addiction. She was abducted by him, and when she came to, she found herself strapped to a chair with that contraption on her face. Turns out that the key was in the stomach of her dead cellmate. At least she thought he was dead, turns out he was just paralyzed. Anyways, Amanda musters enough courage to stab the dude and then cut him open to retrieve the key to free herself. She was one of the few lucky people to escape the wrath of Jigsaw. Others hooked to this trap haven't been as lucky. In our second spot, we have The Collection. The 2012 film The Collection is a sequel to the 2009 film The Collector. One of the more gruesome scenes involves a nightclub, a bumping party, and some deadly blades. Not a kind of party you're gonna catch me at. So basically, the bad guy in this film, the Collector, booby traps an entire nightclub. It starts off with the main characters of the film going to this party, but one of the characters sees her boyfriend with another woman. Being upset, she leaves the dance floor and unknowingly sets off a booby trap. From there, massive blades start coming down to the dance floor, ready to chop up the distracted dancers. And in a very bloody scene, it does just that. But the Collector doesn't stop there. The survivors weren't safe for long. Afterwards, they get trapped in this cage, and the roof of the cage starts lowering down on the panicked victims. And sadly, they didn't escape that, so they all got squished to death. It's quite an elaborate trap if you ask me. It's also very dark and gory to watch this all happen. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Shotgun Carousel. Not gonna lie, I could have made this list entirely with traps from the Saw movies. Jigsaw, or John Kramer, has taken the lives of countless victims with his gruesome traps. This time, we have the Shotgun Carousel. It was featured in the 6th movie of the Saw franchise. 6 people were chained to a pole of a rotating playground merry-go-round thing. There was also a shotgun attached to it. Then the ride was spun. When the ride stops, the shotgun will go off and shoot whoever is directly in front of it. In order to survive, you have to rely on someone to press down on 2 buttons simultaneously. The only catch, when they do this, their hand is pierced with a metal spike. So this whole trap is kinda down to luck. You're just strapped in hoping the ride never stops with you directly in front of the gun. But here's the thing, the guy pressing the button chooses who's going to live and who's going to die. In the movie, it's a man named Will. He was brought in because he caused the death of numerous seriously ill people by denying them coverage for their treatments. At the beginning of the scene, Jigsaw announces that he can only save 2 people. So basically, Will is stuck choosing who he's gonna save. Everyone is in a panic, pleading with Will, telling him why they should be spared. At the beginning, Will hesitated to have his hand pierced and let Aaron be the first one to be killed. This furthered the panic of everyone because no one wants the same thing to happen to them. Honestly, it's a true nightmare.
In at number 5, The House That Jack Built. Now when you see Lars von Trier listed as the director of a movie, you know that that film isn't exactly going to be enjoyable or an easy experience to get through, that's for certain. I mean, the films under his belt go as follow: Breaking the Waves, The Idiots, Dancer in the Dark, Dogville, Antichrist, Melancholia and Nymphomaniac, to name a few. All very challenging movies to sit through, particularly The Idiots. That was the closest I've ever come to walking out of a film. It was so offensive. So offensive. Melancholia is perhaps the easiest to get through simply because it is the most mainstream and tosses the Dogma Manifesto out of the window. Now, released in 2018 and directed by Von Trier, The House That Jack Built stars Matt Dillon, Uma Thurman, Riley Coe and Jeremy Davis, and follows Jack, played by Dillon, a serial killer who commits a slew of murders in the state of Washington over a 12-year period. The movie is far more of a stomach churner than his previous movies, barring Antichrist, which needs an entire list just for itself. Throughout the movie, Jack commits some truly vile acts, to innocents, to animals, and more that I definitely can't discuss on YouTube. The movie premiered at Cannes following a multi-year ban on the director after he said he sympathized with Hitler. Never forget, that clip still makes my entire body cringe. I just watched it before coming down here. I'm not the same. Now, when The House That Jack Built screened at Cannes, people walked out, and not just a couple of people. No, over 100 people walked out of the theatre, with many of them turning to Twitter to state how disgusting and vomitive the movie was, even going as far as to state that it should never have been made. The movie was apparently so vile that it was forbidden from competing for the grand prize at the film festival, so instead it screened outside of the competition in order to avoid any controversies, like Antichrist. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to hit the like button. It really helps us out a lot. In at number 4 we have Revenge. Any movie centering on assault is always a tough one to sit through, that's for sure. Irreversible still keeps me up at night. That movie is truly the most disturbing thing I've ever seen, and I've watched a lot of horrific. Released in 2017 and directed by Coralie Fargy, Revenge is a French revenge horror movie that follows a young woman, Jen, who is assaulted by 3 men and left for dead in the middle of the desert. However, when she recovers, she seeks vengeance upon her attackers. The movie is a bloody battle between the attackers and Jen, and it truly ascends to levels you never expected it to go. One particular moment that had audience members feeling physically sick and resulting in one viewer having a seizure in the middle of the theatre involved one of the attackers stepping on a large piece of glass and having to remove it from his foot. The lead of the movie, Matilda Lutz, also stated that that scene made her feel weird. Now, if this particular moment doesn't affect you, there are many more moments that might, including someone being impaled on a tree, another person getting stabbed in the eyes, and then of course the intense and bloody face-off at the end of the movie. There is so much blood in this movie, it is almost excessive. Revenge is incredibly brutal, and if someone has a medical emergency halfway through, you can only imagine how horrific it must be. You have been warned. Saying that though, it does have a fantastic feminist spin. So that's something. In at number 3 we have the Green Inferno. Now, I can personally say that even I found the Green Inferno hard to sit through. Not impossible, but certainly hard. There were many moments that had me feeling nauseous and even more that had me covering my eyes. Released in 2013 and directed by Eli Roth, the man behind Cabin Fever and Hostel, the Green Inferno pays homage to Italian cannibal films, specifically Cannibal Holocaust. The film itself follows a group of activists who are forced to fight for survival when they are captured by a cannibalistic tribe. Now, Now, it is quite clear going into the movie that you're not going to be greeted by something pleasant. That's not Eli Roth's MO. If you have ever seen Hostel, you should know this. He loves torture porn, and the more blood and gore the better. However, Eli Roth truly pushes the boundaries with the Green Inferno, and unless you're a horror veteran, you likely won't make it through the entire movie, that's for sure. The threats that are made in this movie regarding mutilation of specific parts of the body, disgusting. I can't even say it, that's how bad it is. From start to finish, the Green Inferno is a misery fest, filled to the brim with sadism and gore, and if you find you can't make it through the whole thing, that's okay, because funnily enough, that is exactly what Eli Roth intended. In an interview with Rolling Stone, he stated, I quote, "If I've really done my job as a director, nobody can actually watch your movie. You don't want people walking out of a movie, you want them running out of the theatre screaming. When that happens, that's like a standing ovation for me." The film was so effective due to its use of practical effects as well as shooting on location with real members of the Amazon's native population. If you think you can make it through the movie, go check it out, but trust me when I say it is a challenge, and you will be thinking about it long after the credits roll. Coming in at number 2, The Woman.
Well, let's get you a number of people that also came out. One, it was so sick she fell. We had to get paramedics.
I totally understand that, but at the same
You know,
time,
this is not humane.
If you didn't quite know what was going on in that clip, I'll happily explain it to you. Essentially, this guy walked out of the screening of The Woman at the Sundance Film Festival and got very, very upset about what he had just seen on screen. He describes one woman leaving the movie feeling so sick she fell and paramedics had to help her. He also goes on to describe the movie as inhumane and does not believe the film should have ever been selected for the festival. He gets very upset, but the Sundance workers handle the situation incredibly well. Anyway, that just gives you a small taste of the impact this movie had on people. Released in 2011 and directed by Lucky McKee, The Woman stars Pollyanna McIntosh as a feral woman from a violent clan who is captured by a lawyer and chained up in his home, where he attempts to forcibly tame her. It is revealed over the course of the movie that the family who kidnapped the woman are incredibly dysfunctional, with the son, Brian, enjoying inflicting pain on others. The movie depicts the madness of this family perfectly and shows what levels of depravity they will go to in order to get what they want. The focus at times isn't so much the woman, but more so the dynamic of this dysfunctional family. However, saying that the acts performed on this woman by father and son are absolutely disgusting, with the torment being unending and unforgiving. You'll have an incredibly hard time, almost impossible time getting through this movie, and it truly is one of the more disturbing films out there, that's for sure. It's not for the faint-hearted. And finally, in at number 1 we have Raw. Raw is perhaps one of the most difficult horror movies for anybody to sit through, and I'm not confusing it with that weird Melanie Griffiths movie spelled R-O-A-R, like a lion roar. This one's something else. Raw is perhaps one of the most difficult horror movies for anybody to sit through, with many walking out of the movie theatre and a handful even throwing up, and some even passing out in the middle of the theatre. Yes, that's how disturbing this horror movie truly is. Released in 2016 and directed by Julia Ducournau, Raw follows a young vegetarian woman who is in her first year of veterinary school. However, after she tastes meat for the very first time, she develops an intense craving for flesh. Lovely stuff. However, she can't quite seem to satiate her desire for meat, with chicken not doing the trick, or even a hamburger. No, what she wants is human flesh. Now, there was quite literally just one scene that had everyone's stomach churning, and that was when our protagonist, Justine, eats her sister's finger after she accidentally cuts it off. When this moment played on screen at the Toronto International Film Festival, 2 viewers passed out completely, resulting in an ambulance being called to the festival. However, these 2 weren't the only ones to find the film hard to get through, or should I say impossible. When Raw screened at the Cannes Film Festival, a friend of the director passed out as well. Yes, this film just results in a series of people passing out, almost like in Stand By Me. When one person throws up, they all throw up. It should be noted that the finger scene is far from the worst thing you'll see in Raw. It's just the beginning, and if you can't get through that scene, it's best to just turn it off, in my opinion.